But things can change. The sanctions will continue to bite and they'll continue to get worse. But at the same time, Russians, they're pretty hardy people. I think the best summary I've ever seen is a book I found in St. Petersburg that is called The Big Book of Russian History. And on every page it just says, and then it got worse. Which is, I think, the best summary of Russian history I could ever hope for.
Weakening the Russian army could be one of the major steps to making sure Russia doesn't do something like this again. Now, so my main thing is if we're going to threaten something publicly, I want us to have the ability to do it, right? It's the same reason that if we're going to say we're going to support Taiwan, and which I'm hugely supportive of Taiwan, we got to make sure we will actually do it. I want it to be actionable.
Joe Biden had this weird gaffe, I think a year ago, where he said, if you don't know what you're doing, neither does your enemy. Which, it kind of fits into the meme of him being senile or whatever. But it turned out to be true, because Putin is the Russians have no idea what they're doing. They tried to march into a foreign country with parade uniforms.
NATO is also wargaming it, of course. I mean, they're not going to post it on Twitter for us to cover, exactly. Obviously, but there are plans, basically. Although, actually, one thing I want to mention, the one thing that we could do to Russia, of course, Putin's alternatives are all bad. The only realistic option is to break Russia on this and then split Russia up.
This detachment from reality that is so glaring there, which is this weird culture, American cultural rhetoric. It's like, oh, I'm being cancelled. You invaded a country.
No, it didn't. It's the West's fault.
It's a special military operation.
That's right. Yeah.
What? You didn't make a stupid tweet. You didn't. You invaded a country. This isn't Fox News.
The Senate passed a $40 billion emergency aid package for Ukraine on Thursday, but with a small group of isolationist Republicans loudly criticizing the spending and the war entering a new and complicated phase, continued bipartisan support is not guaranteed. The director of the National Intelligence warned the Senate Armed Services Committee recently that the next few months may be volatile. The conflict between Ukraine and Russia could take a more unpredictable and potentially escalatory trajectory, she said, with the increased likelihood that Russia could threaten to use nuclear weapons. These are extraordinary costs and serious dangers, and yet there are many questions that President Biden has yet to answer for the American public with regards to continued involvement of the United States in the conflict. Is the United States, for example, trying to help bring an end to this conflict through a settlement that would allow for a sovereign Ukraine and some kind of relationship between the United States and Russia? Or is the United States now trying to weaken Russia permanently? Has the administration goal shifted to destabilizing Vladimir Putin or having him remove, etc., etc., etc.? And this is the section that got the most heat. It is tempting to see Ukraine's stunning success against Russia's aggression as a sign that with sufficient American and European help, Ukraine is close to pushing Russia back to its positions before the invasion. But that is a dangerous assumption. A decisive military victory for Ukraine over Russia, in which Ukraine regains all of its territory Russia has ceded since 2014, is not a realistic goal. Though Russia's planning and fighting have been surprisingly sloppy, Russia remains too strong, and Mr. Putin has invested too much personal prestige in the invasion to back off now. So my question, we can go around the room on this one, is what did you guys think of the article or the portions that I just read off?
We'll just start. May I?
Sure.
All right. So, well, this is to some extent this is general appeasement from the people who from the people who wrote this. Obviously, to try and bargain on other countries' behalfs, to tell people tell a country under attack what they should do. In your opinion, to make a deal which is not beneficial to them, but it would contribute to this global peace which we're now chasing, I guess. That's a distinct appeasement sort of behavior. And it's also funny, like the more you move towards the far right and the far left, the more Ukraine disappears, as they say. So the less agency Ukraine has, and this article sort of exhibits that sort of thinking that. Ukraine has basically, it doesn't matter what Ukrainians want, there are higher powers at play here, and essentially Vladimir Putin's feelings at this point are more important than Ukraine's territorial sovereignty. Of course, a big scarecrow, I guess, that people use here is the nukes. We should make peace with Putin, otherwise he'll nuke us. But that too is just, of course, the fear is there. Of course, the nuclear escalation is there. But the escalation will only happen if Putin escalates, right? The West will not escalate. We can discount that right off the bat. And so the fear of nuclear weapons, well, we should take it into account. It should not be used to give Putin any leeway. Russia is a far-right dictatorship at this point, full-on fascism, borderline neo-Nazi, borderline. I'd like to stress, and of course, and also Russian politics and sort of Russian decision making and that sort of political elite is very highly based on power and nothing else. Almost any concessions, any steps back, any attempt to try to solve this conflict in a civilized sort of Western way, so to speak, will be viewed as weakness from Vladimir Putin and his clique. It's useless. That will only embolden them for further aggression in the future. The Soviet way of negotiating, and I'm gonna close with this. The Soviet way demand the absolute maximum at the start and threaten also with the absolute worst consequences. In this case, nuclear warfare. And all this in service to achieve X, right? And so if you start out with 0% X, you say you want 100%, and if you don't get it, everyone's getting nuked. Okay. So, and then even as the pressure builds, or as you maintain the pressure, some people in the West, collaborators, etc., will start caving one by one and say, "Hey guys, we don't want nuclear war, so let's just give them something, give something to Russia so that they'll back off." And then this eventually leads to Russia getting 20% of X, and then Russia de-escalates, and basically Russia has given nothing at that point. They didn't have to do absolutely anything, and they have 20% of X instead of 0% of X, and then the cycle goes on later on, a few years later, and this is the Soviet negotiation cycle, and we should not be trapped in it.
What confuses me most about the article is in the first two paragraphs, it says one of the big risks is nuclear threats of nuclear attacks, even before this invasion started, the widening invasion of February 24th, nuclear threats have continued. We've seen the movement of nuclear weapons in Belarus and that change of policy. We've seen them threaten to nuke almost every country in Europe at this point. I don't understand why a nuclear threat, unless the New York Times is going to make the statement that there is a heightening risk of actual nuclear war. Unless they're going to say that's not a change from what's already been happening for the last 3 or 4 months. I don't understand what the problem is there.
It's slightly more explicit now, perhaps, and as time goes on, obviously, the more threats there are, it has a psychological effect on people. But I do believe that in this case, it's just simple appeasement behavior. There are people who want to make peace with Russia at all costs, usually for monetary reasons, because the West, pardon my language, couldn't stop sucking Russian dick before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Investment to Ukraine was really scarce and really sort of minimal. Let's talk about trains as an example, because hey, that's my forte, right? In Ukraine there was like this huge back and forth push pull, etc., to get Stadler, the train manufacturer, to invest in Ukraine, to move from Belarus to Ukraine, and this was before the war. Now the plans are axed for the foreseeable future, obviously. Meanwhile, in Russia, the country that has been conducting an 8-year low-intensity conflict in Ukraine, Siemens was financing the renewal of the Moscow suburban fleet, hundreds of EMUs, huge orders, billions of euros and dollars. And so this is what we're dealing with here. A significant part of the European establishment, rich old people in high places, would be very much interested in restoring ties with Russia immediately. They don't care about ideals or anything like that. For them, it's all about money and this technocratic sort of, Wanda durch Handel, etc. Although I don't believe they even believe in that anymore. So for them, it's just an excuse. They need nuclear weapons to get back to the negotiating table, just business as usual, and let's continue wallowing in this swamp of Russian oil money and oligarchs, and their orders of yachts and high-end fashion luxury goods from Western European firms.
Michael, what do you think? I remember talking to you about this. I think you might be a little bit more reserved than me and Adam. What do you think?
Yeah, Adam is very correct that the appeasement is not a particularly good option because of the fact that we are, you look at republics like South Ossetia and Abkhazia and Georgia, and appeasing the Russians has not solved the problem in Georgia. But at the exact same time, obviously, I'm going to give on both sides here, but there is a worry, and as we spoke about last time, that Ukraine is on a good footing at the moment. They are doing really, really well, and if things go wrong, they may not be in as strong a negotiation position. So, for instance, right now with the war in the east, we are in the kind of bits of the country that were built up over the sort of 2014 to 2022 brick. It is much harder to fight through this territory. We are going to hit once you get past that and push out from Luhansk and you capture places like Kramatorsk, then you'll be able to push further in with a bit more ease. And that is a worry by the Ukrainian Defense Forces at the moment. There's also a worry that there may be a push in the south towards Odessa. It's still pretty up in the air. You'd have to see Kramatorsk fall first and Mykolaiv. But there is a worry that if Ukraine goes into the negotiating position having lost Odessa or lost Kramatorsk, they are going to be in a weaker point. So obviously it's the casino where your chips are still in your hands. Ukraine is doing quite well, and this is a much stronger negotiating position than where they were in February, which is great. And Ukraine is punching well above the weight of what they expected. But obviously there are other forces that are, outside of Ukraine who are also pushing for this conflict to sort of start to draw to an end. So there are NATO forces who are starting to worry that the alliance is not as strong as it was in February. There are a few nations, obviously I'm sure Adam will talk about Hungary, who is always had a bit of a slight Russian bend in some of their leadership. There's Bulgaria as well, who may not be as keen to get too involved. There's also worries that this is starting to get to this sort of second wave of conflict. So if we're already seeing instability in Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Mauritania, Egypt, which are direct sort of flow-ons from either the lack of wheat and grain or Russians returning home from being laborers, Tajiks returning home from being laborers. And there is this sort of second wave of conflict starting to brew because of Ukraine. So obviously there are outside forces who are not Ukrainians who are starting to push for this war to draw to an end, or, grab your chips and run out the casino where you can. But, when you talk to Ukrainians on the ground, they are not willing to give up the territory. It's a sovereign country and they want to fight for it, and they're willing to fight really hard to get this territory. Whether it goes back to the 2014 borders, whether we go back to sort of the 2022 borders is still up for grabs and up for debate. But speaking to the Ukrainian troops on the ground, the morale is still very, very high. I think it's just a lot of business interests, as well as the fact that there are outside countries, whether they be Mauritania or Tajikistan or Central Asia watchers, who are kind of hoping this thing comes to an end because it is causing instability in a number of these peripheral nations. So, yeah, I fully agree with Adam, though, that appeasement is not going to solve this problem. Effectively, if we just allow Putin, we say, cool, we'll go back to, you can keep the Mariupol and you can keep the south, and this thing comes to an end. We're going to have the same conversation. I look forward to coming back on the show in 2026 when we see Ukraine invasion number 3.
Quickly, I just wanted to say, back to the article. The article actually talks about what you just said, this idea of the fracturing of the alliance, that the longer this goes on, a lot of economies in Europe that might be more reliant on certain trade options or a little bit more encouraging this to end more quickly. Of course, the Italians were recently criticized in the media for comments they made behind closed doors about seeing what concessions could be made to bring this conflict to an end. The Germans have been endlessly lambasted in the media. And of course, Macron has done his late night phone calls with Mr. Putin. He's been a little bit famous for. And so that is one of the problems that the article brings up. It says they don't know how long the alliance can withstand. And reports have come out saying that is what Putin is betting on. He doesn't think the alliance can withstand this kind of full-blown, we're going to kind of chop off the economic road with Russia. And that's what Putin is betting on.
Well, good luck with that. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, that is a real trouble. Is a lot of these countries are, it's a good position now, but we already are seeing, there's less and less media coverage on Ukraine. There's less and less people seem to be interested. There is a few, we know winter's going to come up, and when gas prices are very high, we will see problems of people in in Ukraine. There are elections coming up in a number of these NATO states who, if the gas price is twice as high, they're going to blame intervention for it, even though that may not be the cause of it. There's also problems of, frankly, we don't know where all the javelins are we've given out, and that's a big worry in the State Department at the moment. When the first civilian plane accidentally gets shot down, there will be outcry going, look, why is this war still going on? It was February, I don't remember it. So it's I think there's definitely a worry that the alliance is not nearly as held together as people like to think it is. But right now, this is the strongest NATO has been in years. We were having lots of talks a year ago of, is NATO still a relevant organization? Now it's very much a relevant organization with Sweden and Finland joining over the next couple of weeks. So yeah, I'd love to get Adam's thoughts on this.
Sure. So I would say I disagree with this point of view to a certain extent. Because with this you also have to take into account one big factor, is that namely China. So China is, of course, has not been involved in this really, as them trying to play it neutral, but it's been observing obviously what's happening to Ukraine, because of course China would like to, at the end of the day, do something similar as Russia is doing, at least to Taiwan. Of course, to Taiwan, it's not realistic now. The US came out and said, okay, we're going to militarily protect Taiwan should push come to shove. But still, the current Ukraine war would be is rather a precedent that all these upcoming rival powers like China are observing with a keen eye, and that is, I would say that is really, really against U.S. geopolitical interest. So the U.S. really cannot let this thing slide with Russia, because if they do, then that puts them in a worse position with China, or at least that would embolden China, and that would be contrary to hard U.S. geopolitical interests. And since the U.S. is the most influential player within NATO, militarily, economically, at the very least with U.S. support, or with the U.S. building up cohesion, or with the U.S. negotiating for a pro-Ukrainian position, I think that should be enough until the Russian economy collapses, as it is slowly doing currently, and it will be enough until the Russian army basically just grinds itself to nothing. There's now talks that the US will deliver to Ukraine the sort of a high-range multiple rocket launchers, so-called HIMARS systems. That will be a huge game changer once those come through and true. So we'll see. With that, the Ukrainians will be able to cause even greater losses to the Russian army, to the point where they can just halt the entire offensive. Of course, we also have to consider, when we're talking about how long Western cohesion will last. Well, how long will Russia last? So right now, in the coming months, we have to take every single opportunity we have to just grind Russia down to the dust, and because ultimately the countries standing. Ukraine's and Russia's standing at the end of this conflict will determine the outcome.
I wanted to know, Kraut, I was interested in your idea. What do you think of the idea of the cohesiveness of the NATO alliance? Do you think they're going to hold up against the pressure when the going gets tough economically?
I have an Eastern European friend with who I talked about the division in European politics about this, and he pointed out to me that there's a very significant East-West divide, in particular between countries that used to be in what was called the Eastern Bloc and countries that were in Western Europe. And he calls what has recently been happening, in particular with Eastern Europeans flooding Ukraine with weaponry and support, he calls it the revenge of Eastern Europe, in the sense of that these are countries that have historically, sometimes since the 1600s, have been at the receiving end of Russian aggression for centuries. They've been invaded, they've been sacked, burnt, occupied, they had attempts of their culture being eradicated, they lost lands, etc., etc. And what my Slovak friend described to me was basically gas prices be damned. A lot of Eastern Europeans see this as a sort of an opportunity of historical revenge, basically revanchism, to get back at the historical oppressor and aggressor against them. And I see that divide definitely continuing. I'm pretty sure that the Germans, the French, etc., are going to try to push for some appeasement policies, but the Eastern Bloc is just not going to have any of this. And if you go to Northern Europe, the Scandinavians in particular, the Swedes and the Danes, they don't have to care about gas prices at all anymore, because they have, one has to say at this point, almost pretty much successfully done their green energy reform. They uncoupled themselves from Russian hydrocarbons. They don't need to worry about this. They can keep continuing supporting Ukraine with no impact on them whatsoever.
Not to mention the gas prices. Oh, may I add something? Thank you. So, with the gas prices, with the cost of living issues, there are. It is of course a concern, but I would not say it's a mortal concern for government. So it's not like the gas prices next winter will become just too high, and people will go, okay, we have to just end this war in Ukraine no matter what, and then they elect pro-Russian or like pro-appeasement politicians, and then Ukraine is screwed. I don't think this is realistic. Of course, people are, as the saying goes, people are stupid, but they aren't idiots. Right, so they can see that, okay, why are the gas prices high? Well, don't look at Ukraine, look at Vladimir Putin, right? So if you want to point a finger at someone, then point a finger at him. Also, governments have multiple ways to address the cost of living issue. Macron should really listen to this stream, by the way, because Jesus, like he almost lost the election to a quasi neo-Nazi on this. Germany, for example, is from the 1st of June till the end of August is going to introduce this so-called a ticket, a public transit ticket, which is valid for the entirety of the country, every city, long-distance transport, and also local, for €9 per month. So for the entire summer, you can travel in the entire country unlimited, essentially, basically for free, right? Excluding intercity, Eurocity, and ICE trains. But such measures governments can actually take to reduce the cost of living. Also, programs in the Czech Republic now, the so-called heat pump program and sales are like ramping up, which is a way to essentially phase out gas-based heating. So the next winter is still some ways away. We are months away. Until then, we can actually meaningfully decrease our gas dependence, which many governments are doing, and employ other measures which will actually lessen the cost of living burden. Hopefully Macron does it too, because I don't want like the next Vichy regime or something in France.
I think also a lot of American analysts, they underestimate the fact how cooperative Europeans can be. We have political traditions where we are far more likely to cooperate as a collective, politically speaking. During the 1970s, during the oil crisis, we had car-free weekends where we just agreed to not drive cars during the weekend so that energy prices stay down.
That's
And
true,
I do believe that we're likely to see something like this just happening again. If your average European, if he believes that the cause is worth it, is willing to accept limits on certain luxuries in life. That's just a fact.
Sure. I mean,
And
we fucking hate each other, but there's this spirit of cooperation below it all.
yeah, exactly. And
I hate
I
Europeans
think
too.
if you can convince
We hate
the
you too.
Europeans that having a bit of a colder winter or a more expensive winter is worth it to get rid of this regime, then yeah, they might. There's another point that I wanted to make from the beginning. If you concede to the nuclear threats that Putin is making right now, you're basically, that's the worst thing you can do. Basically concede Ukraine to Putin just because he threatens nuclear war, because then we enter, geopolitically speaking, an age of nuclear sovereignty. You're basically writing down a green check where you say, okay, if you have nukes, you can do whatever the fuck you want to your neighbors, to anyone else. Go ahead. I guarantee you, if you do that, any tin pot dictator anywhere in this world will try to get nuclear weapons.
I mean,
we will enter an age of enormous nuclear armament if we do this.
honestly, I'd be much more scared of say, for example, the Kim regime or a nation that is trying to get nukes post that than before it. What you're going to do is you're going to encourage that behavior. I completely agree. And when it comes from the American perspective, because for once I'm the only American in the room, I mean, the only politicians that ended up voting against the $40 billion in aid from the United States, which was the most massive amount of aid delivered to Ukraine, were people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Madison Cawthorn, who just lost his re-election campaign, and just the complete political fringes of the United States. Now, if the economy spirals out, or if there's some issues economically in the United States, or it worsens in the U.S., I still don't think we're going to see a lot of wavering of support in the U.S.
There's 2 points I wanted to add to this.
Okay.
If Russia uses nuclear weapons, that's it. Like, it will lose the last friends it has. I guarantee you that India will turn its back on Russia. I guarantee you that China will lose, completely turn its back on it. It kind of is already quietly, but that would be it. I mean, it's a dangerous game of chicken to play, but at this point, I think it's worth playing. And the second point that I wanted to make concerning the members of the US Congress complained that this is expensive. War is expensive. War is really expensive. You're burning money with every shot you take.
I guess the 3 things one needs for a war are money, money, and money, as they say.
I just don't think that this is going to be the war that breaks the camel's back in the United States and sends them back into isolationism. It's a really easy thing to sell to the American public. We're clearly in the moral right. Americans don't need to worry about losing any blood, so this isn't like Afghanistan, and Joe Biden has been very consistent about American troops will not be sent to Ukraine to engage in any combat missions. There's a strategic reasons the United States are interested in continuing to support Ukraine. Secretary Lloyd Austin has been very open about the fact that he wants to use this war in a way to weaken the Russian Federation. Whether you like that framing or not doesn't matter. I don't think the United States is going to move off of this course. There are economic reasons to support the war. There are strategic reasons to support the war. And there's moral reasons to support the war. And it's the first war that's been popular in the United States to really support in a long while. And it's overwhelmingly popular in the United States. And so I really don't see any scenario where that gets set off track anytime soon, at least in the US, which is probably definitely one of the most important allies Ukraine has when it comes to the just huge amounts of aid it's sending, and the fact that it seems to go a little further than other countries can. For example, with the long-range rocket systems that seem to be not technically confirmed by the Biden administration, but confirmed by reporters, probably going to be announced next week.
There's also a point on the arsenal that is being sent, the weapons that are being sent to Ukraine. Most of these were built and intended for a war against Russia, which is a big irony in all of this. Most of our arsenals, most of our weapons were built in the Cold War, anticipating a war with the USSR. And the fact that they're kind of now being used for that, it's in the end funny almost. It's, oh yeah, you finally get to fulfill your destiny. But the idea that we have to keep sitting on them and keep them in case of this, no, they were built for this purpose. Let them have them.
For the exact in the exact same situations that it was envisioned for, basically, ATGMs were precisely designed, as far as I know, in the second half of the 20th century against assumed big Russian motorized columns moving towards Europe, which is exactly the same thing they did in Ukraine, like large, heavy motorized columns. Which then, like, small mobile groups carrying these ATGMs launchers can just take out and harass and cause losses. And well, that ended up happening. Soviet doctrine never changes.
I wanted to point out to Mike, the expert here. I actually think that China, as a reaction to this, is currently shitting themselves. Because there are 2 things that they did not expect. First off, they didn't expect the Russian army to perform so poorly. And you have to keep in mind that the entirety of the Chinese arsenal is basically weapons that are reverse engineered from Russian equipment, meaning it's basically second-hand cheap and therefore even worse stuff than the Russians have. And their military doctrines are built upon Russian military doctrines. So militarily, they probably have to do a lot of restructuring right now. Second, the unity of the West in sanctioning Russia is something that they did not anticipate, and that is something that they fear now. They know that this would hit them, and if something like that would happen to China, they would be screwed, because the entirety of their economy is built on exporting plastic rubbish to the rest of the world.
I fully agree. So effectively, China's been a really interesting case in this whole thing. Not only so, it's been really interesting watching Central Asia over the last little while that a lot of these countries, particularly Kazakhstan, was buying Chinese-designed drones for a while. Now, effectively, they're moving to Turkish-made drones because the Bayraktars have been doing so well. And the Bayraktars are starting to become a sort of AK-47 of the 21st century. They're cheap, they're effective, they're wonderful, and they're really easy to get off the ground. So, it is interesting to watch China. I think China's been slowly watching the Russian economy move further east, effectively toward China, because China is getting to the demand for gas. and they are trying to get sort of a blockade-proof column for hydrocarbons coming in. And this has effectively sped up China's timeline for its influence over Russia by 15, 20 years. Because now it's, Russia is effectively watching the West lock it out. And it's got all this gas to sell. And that's the only thing that keeps the Russian economy really, really afloat. So it's got a choice now trying to sell it into China, to which now you're now effectively Iran, the Central Asians, and a few other people are now panicking because they were the guys selling into China, particularly guys like Turkmenistan, which sends 93.2% of its exports to China, are all worried because now Russia is entering that market, which is going to effectively drive the price of gas down.
There's an interesting point to make on the oil exports from Russia to China, which have effectively ceased. Which is funny because you would expect them to go up under these current circumstances. And there's a really hilarious point to be made there, which kind of tells you so much about the dilapidated and broken state of the Russian economy. Halliburton, you all know what Halliburton is?
Yeah.
Ruthless American oil company. Pulled out of Russia. Yes. Pulled out of Russia as part of the sanction package. A lot of people don't even know that Halliburton operated it. Halliburton operated the Siberian oil fields. And those are now gone because the Russians do not have the technology, the engineers, or the capacity to keep drilling for oil in Siberia themselves. They let the Americans drill out the oil that they sold from Siberia. And which is incredible if you think about it, that they placed that into the hands of an American company. Yeah, and that is the oil they would have sold to China, and now they can't because there's an article that I read around about this. Once you close a Siberian drilling hole for oil, you have to re-drill it from the beginning. You can't sustain it. It's really difficult to drill for oil under these Arctic circumstances. So that's gone now. The only thing they're left with are the gas fields and the stuff they sell to Europe, the Caucasian oil fields. And if you can't, try getting from Caucasia to China, especially with the Black Sea ports closed.
Also, now India and China get to purchase Russian, essentially carbon products at a discount price because they are now in a much stronger negotiating position. Because Europe is buying much less, so you got a whole bunch of leftover to sell, huh? Well,
India is another interesting point because there's a different article that I read about this. There's a belief that if India turned on Russia and joined the sanction package, that the Indian armed forces would cease to function within 5 years and the Indian Air Force would cease to function within 2 years because their equipment is so deeply integrated within the Russian military-industrial complex due to the Cold War alliance that they had with the Soviet Union. So this is probably also going to be a big smack in the face to anyone who's, purchasing arms from anyone in the world. It basically just shows, hey, if you buy weapons from someone, that kind of makes you dependent on that someone. So I think we're going to see a revival of arms industries throughout various countries as well. The Indians are probably going to try to build their own stuff. Right now, they're probably going to try to wean themselves off Russian weapons at any cost possible.
Okay, I want to make sure we get back to the article because I'm really interested in your guys' thoughts on this. And one thing the article hit on a lot was the clarification of the United States, and I think even the world, the alliance's position. Let me read this out quick, and then I'm going to throw it over to Stoic because I want to get him in here. Recent bellicose statements from Washington, President Biden's assertion that Mr. Putin cannot remain in power, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin's comment that Russia must be weakened, and the pledge by the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi that the United States would support Ukraine until victory is won may be rousing proclamations of support, but they do not bring negotiations any closer. Do you think that there is a risk of politicians beating this drum too hard, not being able to bring negotiations closer, or not clarifying exactly what the goal is clearly?
Hello, Ron. My thoughts on this is that the American government is providing a lot of arms to Ukraine as we speak. They already have passed recently the Lend-Lease Act, sort of like the modern-day Lend-Lease Act to Ukraine, which are providing billions of dollars worth of equipment. Now, Ukraine needs this equipment, specifically mostly artillery at this point in time. And the Ukrainians, with the steady supply of munitions and support, can maintain their lines against Russia. But what Russia is hoping on is politicians, for example, in the United States, as well as some dissenting voices within the European bloc, to try and bring, without Ukraine's consent, try to bring this war to a close themselves. So try to repeat almost like the Minsk Accords again, so that Russia can at least get some territory. Because at the moment, Russia's going to be trying to consolidate its gains in the Kherson Oblast, to try it, hopefully at least, to try and make that into a miniature republic in the similar vein in the Donbass region. So what Russia's really playing here is almost a long game. Now, with the sanctions imposed upon it, it's a question of how long it can actually play this game. But it's hoping, for example, that Germany and France, as well as politicians in the United States, can just beat those drums hard enough to force almost like, you could say, a wavering of support to Ukraine, so that Russia can get some concessions in a negotiated political settlement. But that's increasingly at odds with like Eastern European states like, Poland and the Baltic states, who are very firm in their commitment to Ukraine reclaiming most of its territory against what they've rightfully view as Russian aggression. So I think that there's definitely a strategy here, at least from the Putin regime, to try and bring these like dissenting voices, to bring them to the political negotiating table, so they can repeat almost like a Minsk stalemate, so they can at least consolidate some gains in the Ukraine.
Does anybody personally, right? If I'm gonna actually agree a little bit with the article here. I think statements like Putin cannot remain in power and we must weaken Russia, having even the defense secretary make those statements publicly, I think that's kind of dropping the ball. I think the public statement should be basically nothing else than we are simply interested in defending Ukraine's sovereignty and defending them as a nation state and defending their democracy. Once you start getting into this, I think it's much easier to argue against it, because then people can say, this is just about weakening Russia and destroying Russia and hurting Russia, and this isn't about Ukraine. This is just, you're using Ukraine as a proxy. It makes it much easier to say that when you have statements from Joe Biden like Putin.
Well, I disagree with you. I disagree with you on that one completely.
Okay.
Putin made maximalist demands, so he has to get a maximalist response. He wanted to
basically
subdue, invade, and fully annex a country, this is like dragging Europe back into the 1930s. And there's only one response to that. And it's kind of annoying that many European countries are not giving that response.
I understand.
In particular,
Good, may I?
Sure.
Yeah.
So right now we're playing the Soviet negotiations game, right? So as we've all said, Putin came out with the maximum demand, as in we want Ukraine neutral, demilitarized, etc., under Russian rule, basically, and also if not, you get then you get nuked. And look, here's an invasion in 2022 on European soil. So Putin is playing like Putin is doing the exact same thing, the Soviet negotiations thing. Put everything out there. Fuck you. Let's go all gas, no brakes. And to this, the only I would say reasonable response is to do the exact same thing. This has not been done really, but like this Soviet sort of tactic needs to be dared. It needs to be dared and. Then basically watch it collapse over time. If I were the decision maker, just in closing, as a decision maker, what I would say, Putin cannot stay in power. By the way, if there is any escalation, then Russia is getting nuked, and with that, we're putting our sort of Western nuclear forces at the highest possible readiness, and we're also shipping over like 200,000 U.S. soldiers to Poland should anything happen. Of course, you're not intending to use any of that, but you're raising the stakes for Russia, and this is like this. The problem with this stake raising for Russia is that there's only like this doubling down. Is that there's a limit to which you can double down, and the West can move farther with this, right? The West can move. The West can double down more essentially than Russia, and Putin has reached now the end of his doubling down. Now that his offensive, this invasion basically faltered, and this is the exact same game we have to play, and this is the only way we can beat Russia for like on the long term, so that they won't jump around later.
Yeah, but just quickly, I wanted to respond. To be clear, I believe when you speak to the public, you should be very clear going into a conflict or supporting a conflict what our goals and mission statement is. And I think it's very easy to sell to a public, to sell to everyone, and unbelievably easy to justify. Yeah, our mission statement is to get Russian troops out of Ukrainian sovereign territory. I don't think moving it to we must remove Putin from power or Putin cannot remain in power. I think this is you're drawing lines that I don't even think are close to reality. I understand maximalist response, but I think when communicating with the public, you need to be honest with them.
Well, that could have been phrased differently. I agree. At the end of the day,
No. It shouldn't have been phrased differently at all.
Like, the same weight, but like a bit smarter, I would say.
Putin violated the most important post-World War agreement that we have politically in Europe. He invaded a country unprovoked. Like,
yes.
If you just say, okay, just get him out of Ukraine, he will just cower back and go like, it doesn't resolve the issue. There has to be a punishment for him doing that. There has to be a really clear statement of you don't get to do this anymore in Europe in the 21st century. If you do this, you're a pariah. You're out of everything.
Wait, that's one thing. Making them a pariah, separating them from Europe, the economic system, punishing their military by absolutely smashing it in Ukraine and pushing them out of Ukraine. Yeah, doing all of that is fine. But when you say, hey, we want you removed from power. Not even we want you.
Normal.
You must.
Normal,
you must be removed from power.
It is very okay, but it is normal for politicians all across the world to often call upon the removal from another politician. I can show you many examples of European politicians, especially in the European Commission, calling for Orban to just go and disappear into thin air or something. It's a normal thing. In many an occasion, and in this occasion in particular, it is the only adequate response.
The public response to that would be, just very quickly,
and then Michael.
just for them to share. Yes, sorry?
Then Michael.
Yes. So basically, Putin has already sold himself and the Russian leadership as like the ultimate evil, like Satan reborn. Basically, you've all seen the pictures from the Kiev suburbs, from the Bucha massacre, etc. Like in the minds of people, Putin and his company are now huge. They're like radioactive, untouchable. So statesmen like this, like Putin cannot stay in power. Hell yeah, like they will fly. I think absolutely. But I would say the same thing should have been said in a bit smarter way, but at this point we're just arguing the details. With the overarching point, I agree with Kraut.
So I'm not a Putin apologist. I'm not a Putin fan at all. But this is the complication of the subject is the fact that unlike if all the Republicans were to have a heart attack and die tomorrow, there would be Democrats to step in. Whereas in Russia, there isn't as combined in opposition, and that's one of the troubles we're having at the moment. If you look at sort of the major parties in Russia, whether it be the SRZP or whether it be the LDP or even the communists, who are the second biggest party in Russia, none of them are effective opposition. And that's the trouble we're having is if Putin is removed and the West can pat itself on the back and say, yep, we've won this thing, then, if Patrushev comes into power or Bortnikov, who's the head of the FSB, comes into power, and Bortnikov or Shoigu,
love how you say his name, it's beautiful,
would effectively, is that better than what Putin is? I would argue that Bortnikov particularly would be a much, not nearly a win for the West. There is also a worry in sort of Russian circles. And again, I don't agree with this. I think it's a little more propaganda than I'd personally believe. That effectively, in the 90s, when the collapse of sort of when we got rid of the system of government, it was chaos in the 90s. Everything that wasn't bolted down was stolen, and everything that was bolted down, they came back 2 days later with a screwdriver. There is a worry that because Putin has embedded himself so far in a lot of the governmental organizations as well as the oligarchic regimes in Russia, that removing him overnight would effectively form a giant power vacuum in Russia. And there's a lot of older generation who do worry about that. And that's I'm again not a Putin apologist. There is a general worry that, by calling for Putin's resignation, that's not likely to happen, particularly while he still has the support of the FSB and while he still has the support of the army behind him. But things can change. The sanctions will continue to bite and they'll continue to get worse. But at the same time, Russians, they're pretty hardy people. I think the best summary I've ever seen is a book I found in St. Petersburg that is called The Big Book of Russian History. And on every page it just says, and then it got worse. Which is, I think, the best summary of Russian history I could ever hope for.
Can I?
Yeah. Yep, go ahead.
Can I just quickly add that I think there's just about two, I guess, well, mainly two distinct attitudes when it comes to the support for Ukraine. There's the one of like Western Europe, as characterized by France and Germany, and even to a lesser extent some politicians in America, where it's like, okay, we'll support Ukraine as long as we get to some form of like political settlement with Putin. And then there's an attitude in Eastern Europe, which I tend to more align with, espoused by countries like Poland and the Baltic states, who, as Zelensky notes, are very much more, you could say, antagonistic towards Russia. And I think, to be totally honest, they have the right view. Like, Russia has invaded Ukrainian sovereignty. It's acting like an imperial entity within a sovereign nation. And that, yes, sure, maybe the language of like toppling Putin may not do well to some Western ears, but at the end of the day, it's the type of attitude that must be held, at least. Especially, so in other words, I think that the Western states, especially France, Germany, could learn from at least the Eastern states when it comes to their attitude towards the Putin regime. Almost like take Zelensky's approach. Don't undermine Zelensky in this moment, if you understand what I'm trying to get at. Yeah.
Okay, so I just
want to add one more thing. The other really interesting thing is the day before the invasion, Putin did this really weird televised, session where effectively he got all the sort of major cabinet members, pretty much anyone who could oppose him in a coup, in a room and said, "What do you think of the invasion of Ukraine?" And made them all, say, "Yep, it's a great idea, sir. Love it." Even one of the guys who sort of pushed back and went, "Maybe it's not terribly great," was immediately struck back and he was told, "No, you got to support this." So it has tied a lot of the sort of potential guys who might have the sort of clout nationally to be able to take over Putin's position to the war in Ukraine. There's, even if they were to go, "Hey, if we're looking like a Patrushev was like, hey, I'm not into this war. I was opposed to it. Let's get rid of Putin." Immediately the Russian television stations would effectively play lots and lots of footage of Patrushev saying he's keen on the war. We are seeing, again, the difference. I fully agree with everyone on the panel here. And again, I'm kind of giving the opposite opinion because it'd be very boring if we just all agreed with each other. France, yep, they're on the board, but it is the Bulgarians and possibly the Hungarians I do worry about as the only ones who aren't as keen on this conflict. We are starting to see RT and Russian television stations starting to talk a little bit differently about the war. The coverage in February was glorious victory, return to Russian glory. Today, it's starting to be like, I think, there's particularly RT is starting to be a bit, I think we got most of the Nazis and we can probably start to talk about Novorossiya, which is a sort of taking the south of Ukraine from sort of Kherson eastwards and giving that to Russia. So it's a subtle shifting of the Russian narrative by the Russian sort of press and media, which I think they are starting to prep the public for look, we're not going to take all of Ukraine. This may just, we got Mykolaiv, and it just happened to be that all the Nazis were in Mykolaiv. We did it, guys. Mission accomplished. But yeah, it's still a complicated war coming up. But yeah, again, it's Russian politics is a fraught nonsense.
Good. And then there was also that U.S. intel talking about possibly the plan was to connect with Transnistria, but that stuff just feels like delusion. It almost feels like pure delusion. But I want to say one last thing on this. I am not trying to be a Putin apologist here. I'm just saying if we say something publicly, right, I want an action plan, right? I don't want to have a line in the sand or say we're going to do something and then we don't go and do it. I view this very similarly to 1991, Saddam invading Kuwait. When it comes to weakening the Russian army, I believe that weakening Saddam's army was part of the reason he didn't invade any more countries post-1991, post the Gulf War. Weakening the Russian army could be one of the major steps to making sure Russia doesn't do something like this again. Now, so my main thing is if we're going to threaten something publicly, I want us to have the ability to do it, right? It's the same reason that if we're going to say we're going to support Taiwan, and which I'm hugely supportive of Taiwan, we got to make sure we will actually do it. I want it to be actionable. I don't want our word to be fickle internationally.
Joe Biden had this weird gaffe, I think a year ago, where he said, "If you don't know what you're doing, neither does your enemy," which it kind of fits into the meme of him being senile or whatever. But it turned out to be true. Because Putin is the Russians have no idea what they're doing. They tried to march into a foreign country with parade uniforms. They had no clue what they were doing.
Wait, were they actually wearing parade uniforms?
No, they were storing them in the tanks and stuff. Like they were preparing on like the Khreshchaty Kiev victory parade. But well,
I didn't know that. That's hilarious.
Yeah, and like for the time being, when you say like action plan, I'm pretty sure that NATO has an action plan. I'm pretty sure that the Moscow was sunk with the help of NATO radar installations. Very certain.
There are
that-
scenarios like NATO is also wargaming it. Of course, I mean they're not going to post it on Twitter for us to cover,
exactly.
obviously, but there are plans basically. Although, actually, one thing I want to mention, the one thing that we could do to Russia, of course, Putin's alternatives are all bad. The only realistic option is to break Russia on this and then split Russia up, because Russia is essentially a collection of like smaller. It's a federation, right? So with the help of local warlords, local strongmen, if you split Russia up, I mean, of
dread
course,
that.
you're going to have like lots of small Putins, but at least it's going to be contained.
I dislike it heavily.
It's a theoretical.
I want to address that point. I dislike it heavily when people bring up the idea of splitting up Russia at the end of this war into the various ethnic groups, because first off, it reeks of the kind of imperial talk that we're getting out of Russia in the first place. Second, when the Soviet Union collapsed, there were so many wars that came out of that as a result. So much bloodshed, so much chaos. The war in Transnistria, wars in the Caucasus, wars in Central Asia that everyone forgot about between the Tajiks and the Uzbeks. And those conflicts are going to flare up again, in particular between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And then you add to that conflicts in the Caucasus that are unresolved, and new conflicts like between the Mongol population and the Turkmen population in the Siberian parts of Russia. Like, this is going to devolve into a complete nightmare if you do that. You're going to, if you think you can split up Russia after this, if you think that the Russian state, as awful as an institution as it is, completely collapsing is a good thing. Oh, the chaos and the bloodshed that could come out of that terrified me.
The origin of the current Russian sort of zeitgeist and psyche, and what leads to this such imperialistic action, is the fact that in Russia there is no any sort of meaningful regionalism, so to speak. Everything is very top down, very centrally
There is a
controlled.
regionalism. No, there is a regionalism. This was something that was introduced by Peter the Great, and it kind of lives on in spirit. Lived through the Tsarist age, lived through the Soviet era, and lives on today. It's called the Kremlin system.
Although, it might live on, obviously, but it is by no means dominant. Like, Moscow is the overwhelming force within the country.
The Kremlin system was, you got rule of a local province in Russia, and Kremlin means feeding, which gives away what it kind of means. You received the feeding if you were appointed governor of a Russian province, and then you went there and you got tax exemptions if you exploited it more. So there was an incentive to steal, there was an incentive to exploit the local people, there was an incentive to basically act as a local mafia boss within the Russian state.
Oh, right,
and that system kind of continued in the Soviet Union, where you had things like the cotton mafia in Central Asia, and then it continued afterward now, because that is an interesting thing. Most of the murdered journalists in Russia are local journalists who investigate the corruption of a governor or something like that. And they get murdered. Because if you think the central government in Moscow is crooked, the regional governors, the kind of thieving little petty thieves that run the local provinces, they're far more crooked, far more ruthless, far more likely to murder people. Like, if these people end up in charge of their own country, Jesus, like, these are all little Kadyrovs. Crazy.
Yes, but the only reason though is because they those governors are not really first off, this rampant corruption really comes downstream from Moscow. Like, as we say, like the fish rots from its head. Like, this culture directly sort of trickles down, to use this term, to these regions, and the leaders in the local regions are simply not accountable. First and foremost, they are accountable to Moscow, which is doing the exact same thing, right? And they are less accountable to their people. Governors will still have to take the blame for any problems within in the provinces, but it's not. But the wrath of Moscow is far more severe than the wrath of the local people, right? So what I would at least advocate is some sort of decentralization reform. If not the breaking up of the country, that would be radical. But the same decentralization reform that happened in Ukraine right before the war, funny enough. Where local people have more autonomy and more control of their funds, and not everything flows through Moscow, because that can, as we can see, that can just cause all kinds of systemic issues.
So obviously Moscow, as Kraut was putting out, there are conflicts that are stemming from this. So not only are you going to have Dagestan, you're going to have Sechis, you're going to have Chechnya, you're going to have Tatarstan. All of those are going to, if they are not going to be good as an independent state. But Moscow, again, is the effective middleman or peacekeeper in a lot of these sort of ex-Soviet states. So Azerbaijan, Armenia particularly, we are already seeing the Azeris increase their rhetoric and increase attacks. They're cutting off pipelines to certain areas because Moscow is tied up. Tajikistan at the moment is in huge riots in Gorno-Badakhshan in the east because of this a knowledge that effectively Russia is not going to get involved in peacekeeping missions like they were. We are seeing Kyrgyzstan already starting to go into political instability because Japarov has tied himself to effectively to the Russian regime. Uzbekistan is starting to get much more emboldened. Russia has been very keen on making sure they don't crack down on the Muslim populations too hard because it does form troubles in Kazakhstan quite heavily. We are seeing a lot of these, even so you guys in Turkmenistan, like Sadar Berdimuhamedov, effectively has now been emboldened by the fact that Russia is busy. Without that centralized Russia to effectively be able to, either negotiate between the states or effectively put peacekeepers where they need. Kazakhstan, for instance, in January had Russia rock up to sort of quell the protests. And again, I'm not a fan of Tokayev. Tokayev is we could do a whole segment on the problems with Tokayev and Nazarbayev in Kazakhstan, but without Tokayev in power, Kazakhstan would have been a free-for-all between a few of these fairly crazy oligarchs, and that's a trouble. That without a centralized Russia, how does Russia keep peacekeeping operations in Armenia, Azerbaijan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, as well as then there's a question about Belarus as well.
Two things, actually, if I may. First off, like in the wake of sort of dying empires, there will be lots of squabbles and local fights. But that doesn't mean that the empire shouldn't die. So this would be I would say this should be a result that, to some extent, we should try to prevent it as much as we can. For example, using soft power that Europe, for example, has plenty of. But also, we have to consider that this is like this. At some point, this will last forever, especially now it looks like it. Of course, it's bad that there would be lots of local sporadic fighting, but it's also bad if you have a full-on war in Europe in 2022 that can threaten with nuclear warfare. And also, the second point is that the Russian peacekeeping operations around its perimeters, around its perimeter and the satellite states, that is also essentially part of the Russian imperial project. So Russia is not doing this from the good of their heart. They are there for a reason, and they are actually interested in holding up the current status quo, which will, if left unchecked, lead to local skirmishes. But I think at that point, this is something we should count with. We should face. We should try to prevent. But sooner or later, this will happen anyway.
I disagree with you on this being an inevitability, because what I believe will happen in the near future is the Russian state is going to become far more authoritarian. In particular, if it loses this war, it's going to have a brutal domestic crackdown, as it always has after every war it's lost. And any attempts at any attempts of separatism will be brutally cracked down upon.
I
depends, actually.
Sorry,
I was just going to say.
I'll let Michael wrap us up, because I do want to move. There's one part left of the article we've got to touch before we move on to the next topic.
But I also don't know how much influence Europe has inside Central Asia, particularly with the sort of the worrying states. So Tajikistan is known as effectively the edge of the swirling pit of doom, is what everyone I've spoken with Russian officers, they tend to refer to it that way. And I think it's really interesting that Russia has pulled troops from almost every single front. Everywhere they've got troops, they've pulled for Ukraine, except Tajikistan, because Russia really worries about NATO, but they really worry about Afghanistan destabilizing far more. That's a bit of exaggeration, but still gives a nice point. There is a worry that if Tajikistan falls apart, then that becomes much more extremist. If Kyrgyzstan falls apart, that's going to be a north-south divide. If Kazakhstan falls apart, that's not great either. It is, as much as, yes, Russia's interests are effectively to keep these sort of former Soviet states under its wing. At the same time, the Russians are the reason that Azerbaijan and Armenia came to any sort of, those guys can never negotiate by themselves. It is the most venomous conflict. I've been in so many of these war zones around the country, around the world, and you can usually go, you can have a drink in a bar with a Russian and Ukrainian, or a Tajik and an Uzbek, but you cannot have a drink with a Armenian and Azeri. And to argue that those guys could actually negotiate between themselves is it's worrying. Effectively, there needs to be a third party to negotiate between themselves, and I don't think Europe's done the proper outreach at this point to be the middle ground and the negotiator between the two.
I want to move on to the last part of this article, which we haven't touched on, but it was the part that got the most controversy around it. It is tempting to see Ukraine's stunning success against Russia's aggression as a sign that with sufficient American and European help, Ukraine is close to pushing Russia back to its position before the invasion. But that is a dangerous assumption. A decisive military victory for Ukraine over Russia and the Ukraine regains all of its territory Russia has seized since 2014 is not a realistic goal. Though Russia's planning and fighting have been surprisingly sloppy, Russia remains too strong and Mr. Putin has invested too much personal prestige in the invasion to back down. Russia's strong, Putin's too invested. I mean, there's no way Ukraine can take it all back. That's crazy. What do you guys think of that?
Can I take it? Because, okay, I actually agree with this point, weirdly enough. I am deeply worried that, considering the pretty pathetic initial performance of the Russian armed forces, that there is now going to be a bit of too much overconfidence concerning confrontation with Russia. I'm worried about that. The Russians embarrassed themselves, but it's still a large army. It's still capable of inflicting a lot of damage. And overconfidence really comes before defeat. I do worry that people may be a little too overconfident in a certain way. Like, this war is far from over. There's still so much that can happen. There's mistakes that so many people could make. Wars are fluent, fluctuant things. They change every day. It's really, you can't predict how this will go. And you shouldn't predict how this will go.
I mean, it's Finland would be an interesting example. The first invasion of Finland in 1939 was a disaster for the Russians. It was just, they lost so many men. It was so badly run. But effectively, because they cut the dead weeds away from the army at that point, by the time they hit the later bits of the Finnish war, by the time they re-go in 1943 and solve that problem for them, the Russian army is much better equipped and much better, because this is the first time Russia's had to fight large-scale war since Afghanistan. So this is a lot of the dead weight in Russian army is being culled away. The other interesting thing to look at is Russia effectively during the Cold War. If you're a dictator, you have a choice. You can either turn to Moscow, or you turn to Washington. You get lots of support and guns and armies. But after the Soviet Union fell apart, you effectively you get the Americans the only game in town at that point. The Russian intervention in Syria was a giant, brochure for the Russian army saying, look, dictators, there's another guy in town who can support you. And it's why we saw Burkina Faso and the Central African Republic and Mozambique and a few of these other African nations jump to get, accepting Russian support and arms and effectively tying themselves back towards that. Because of how badly Russia has, effectively done in this conflict, we are already seeing, Mozambique is already pulling themselves away from Russia. The Central African Republic's having their first talks of going, maybe this isn't great. So, it's torn that brochure apart. So even if we return to the January borders of Luhansk and Donetsk, being a breakaway republic, which keeps, Ukraine out of NATO, it would still, the Russian reputation is still deeply hurt, and they will likely not be getting the opinion from particularly the Africans that they are a rising power again. I think this is they've shown their cards.
I guess for me, the big thing for me about this is, it is true we shouldn't have overconfidence, but I still think we should go all in on trying to, at the very least, the bare minimum should be trying to return to the 2022 borders. That should be the bare minimum in my view. But it shouldn't be under the guise of, the Russian army is going to collapse. I think, Kraut, you actually tweeted something out today that really resonated with me, that people, after the initial Russian failure, that, the Russian army is going to collapse in 1 week, or 2 weeks, or, well, now it's 3 weeks, and every week would pass and it wouldn't happen. While they're certainly getting, they didn't bloody their nose, they broke their nose on Ukraine. Russia is a big country.
But their dictatorship, they're willing to sacrifice thousands of people.
Yeah,
they can do that, unlike us.
Exactly.
They
have lost more people in this war, supposedly. We don't know that for sure, because the casualty numbers in this war are all over the place. But the possibility that they could have lost more people in this war at this point than in the war in Afghanistan, their 9 to 10 year war that they fought there is absolutely bizarre. And they had more people available then because they had the entirety of the Soviet Union involved in that conflict as well. And that's what's so bizarre about this war.
There's a point that I want to make. That the Afghan war, however, severely harmed Russia. It's the Soviet Union was a significant contributor to its collapse, not because of the cost, because the Afghan war barely cost anything, the Soviet Union, because the Soviet army was underpaid, equipment was cheap. The thing that hurt the Soviet Union out of the Afghan war is that the Soviet high command tried to hide how many people they lost. They falsified death reports. They didn't send the corpses of dead soldiers back home. They sent letters and fake death certificates back to waiting mothers and wives, saying basically, "Oh, your son, your husband died in a truck accident on his way home," while in fact he got blown to shreds somewhere in Kabul. You know, that attempt at covering up, that is something that really contributed to the decline of the Soviet Union. There's an organization called, I think, the Mothers of Soldiers, which was born back then. And I see that. It's really interesting to me that the Russians are now doing the same thing, hiding how many people are getting killed, lying to families about where their children are, where their husbands are. I think that is one of the things that might come to bite them, because that really traumatized the Russians during the Soviet era, and it might actually have the same effect again.
And this is on, supposedly, if this continues, it's going to be on a larger scale as well, with less people available. And so the amount of Russian mothers who are going to be having this experience, the amount of Russian wives that are going to be having this experience, it's going to be more concentrated primarily within Russia, and they have less of a population pool to pull from. And the thing that's getting me, though, here about this is not only the dishonesty, but also just the clear breaking of, now I know this is going to be crazy, but I think Putin might have violated Russian constitutional law, when it came to the conscripts early in the conflict.
That doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. There is no conception of rule of law in Russia.
I know there's no conception of rule of law, but what I'm getting at is the people that are being used in this conflict at this point and being prepared to be used at this conflict in this point are not even supposed to be the people who are on the front lines of a war. We're talking about border guards getting retrained right now to be possibly deployed next month into the country. People who are never supposed to see conflict, and mothers who and wives who were never supposed to even think that their husband could possibly be killed in a foreign war.
Yeah, you have to know that there's a great Russian military tradition of just burning your most well-trained troops in the first weeks of a war.
Oh, yes.
That's what they did during the Second World War. The best trained soldiers, they immediately sent them to get burned.
But now they don't have demographics anymore. In the Second World War, they had a steady supply of young men throughout the conflict. Now, but even before the Ukraine war, Russia has been basically dying, or at least it's been like the population has been severely decreasing, or at the very least stagnating. They don't have the demographic reserves to pull from anymore. That's why a lot of the casualties you see in Ukraine are minority soldiers coming from like the
It's not
eastern.
necessarily the graphics. That's also because I happen to know a Russian from Kazakhstan who has family in the Mongol province of Russia, and he told me that I don't know, what is the Mongol province called? You might probably know.
Tanatuva.
Not Tuva. Tuva is Turkic. The Tuva are Turkic.
Oh, it is.
A lot of people. Something with B. The Arals. The Aral Seas there.
Buryatia? No.
Yeah, Buryatia. The Mongol province. Yeah. The Mongol province, Buryatia, is so corrupt, so kleptocratic, so broken, so completely dysfunctional that the army is pretty much the only stable prospect of employment. And that's why you're seeing so many Mongolian soldiers there. It's really the only stable prospect of employment there is joining the army.
Oh, yes, that's also true. Something that we have to consider when we talk about, like, okay, who's going to win? When will the Russian army collapse? I don't know. I don't think, a spoiler, I don't think we will see like an outright Russian collapse. We might, but I think currently it's less likely. And I don't think that Ukraine will get back all its territory. I think Crimea is at this point would be gone, unfortunately. And I think at the end of the conflict, we'll see some sort of a settlement, like territorial settlement. I would bet, if I had to bet money, first, like, of course, this is fluid. This is not This is not by no means a certain prediction, and this is by no means something I would want. But I would guess it would be Donetsk, Luhansk to some extent, probably most of those regions, maybe some parts of the south. And Crimea is off the table. This is what I would guess. And the war will end essentially when both sides exhaust themselves. Now, when this will happen? Like, of course, and I have to stress here, when both sides exhaust themselves. So it can happen that the Russian army exhausts itself at some point, in like a few months, and then the Ukrainians can still go in. That means the balance will then at that point shift, and the Ukrainians will push the Russians back. And then when both armies fully culminated, it's trench warfare. No one's going anywhere. At that point, negotiations will start for real, and at that point, there will be some sort of settlement. And depending on how war-weary both societies are, that will largely tell us or inform us how permissive will Ukrainians be, for example, with ceding Ukrainian land. But this conflict, as always, 1 second, Viper. With this conflict, it has multiple layers, right? It's like an ogre and an onion, consequently. So with Ukraine, we have, of course, this frontal warfare right now, which is going on, like this direct engagement between Russia and Ukraine. Okay. How long will Russia and Ukraine be able to keep this up? That's one thing. But these battles are currently fought on open fields and villages, essentially. Another phase of the conflict would be urban warfare, like we saw in Mariupol. And that was oh my God, if there was ever a fucking clusterfuck, then Mariupol was it. But the only reason Russians could force out a victory, just like some sort of victory, just barely eking it out after months, is because Mariupol was cut off right in the beginning. Because Russians rushed all the way to Mariupol, and it was cut off, and it was an island, and the Ukrainians had to airdrop supplies into Mariupol, and most pilots didn't even come back from those missions. And even with that, Russia could barely take Mariupol, and let's not even talk about Azovstal, right? That thing held on for weeks and weeks, and then afterwards, and those were like well rested, somewhat prepared Russian troops that started the Mariupol siege, right? And what do they have now? And so to think that Russia would take cities like Mykolaiv, Odessa, Kharkiv, etc., it's completely ludicrous. They would not take those. Russia at this point can only take like flatlands and villages, essentially, that cannot be well defended. Also, the third layer of the conflict would be in the areas that they took. Is insurgency or partisan warfare. The big problem in Iraq and Afghanistan, mostly Afghanistan, was not the defeating of the army, right? But it was what came after, like what could even curb the US's enthusiasm about this whole war thing. There's currently insurgency going on in the south in many places, and so that will be the third phase of the war, which can just as easily break the Russian army over the long term. So this will not be a quick collapse, but essentially a rotting away that we have to consider. And now, Viper.
Yeah, thanks. From my perspective, Ukraine at the end of the day is fighting a defensive war, and even though it's now coming rather to almost like, I would say it's like kind of a rather kind of almost like a slight stagnation a little bit. I don't want to say it's actual stagnation because, there's little chips by the Ukrainian army and there's little chips of Russian military. But I think from the Ukrainian perspective, I can imagine that Zelensky must be feeling that if he tries go for, say, for instance, a political settlement in the future, what's stopping it from repeating the Minsk protocols, where they just keep this into a frozen conflict and then Russia gets some concessions and then breaks the accords later on and just does the same thing again. So I think from at least it must be from Zelensky's perspective, trying to continue this war and getting as much territory as possible is just at the moment the goal. But I don't know for how long this can go for. I'm a bit more optimistic, I guess, than everyone else on the panel. I think that Ukraine will be still taking some small little chunks of territory in Kherson. But I don't know if it will be able to. Sorry, I don't know if the Ukrainian army will be strong enough or able enough to actually take all of the Donbass. I think that's more of like kind of a a little bit of a dream at this point in time. So for this moment, if I'm correct, most of Russia's forces, correct me if I'm wrong, Markov, most of Russia's forces is concentrated in the east, correct?
Yes, so the majority of the forces are concentrated in the east at the moment in the Luhansk and Donetsk region, and we are seeing large build-ups again in Voronezh and Belgorod, effectively over the Russian border. So it is looking like the concentration will be in sort of pushing out past the Ukrainian build-up zone on the east of Luhansk, the areas that Ukraine has been building defenses in since 2014, past the point of there where it is going to get into much more open fields and much more less easily defendable territory. But again, I think, as Adam pointed out, the south is effectively the place that this war will mostly be fought. I mean, right now we are, as of this morning, we're looking at effectively if you've got Severodonetsk and Lysychansk is sort of where the fighting is at the moment. And we're seeing the Russians push from Lyman, which Lyman gives them ability to put artillery into Kramatorsk. And they'll push from Lyman and Popanza and probably meet up, I'm guessing, in Siversk would be the goal, looking at the Russian forces, and form cauldrons. And this is actually really typical to what they do in their exercises, which has been, all your Russia analysts have been really worried, like kind of confused, because the Russians run a lot of their war games doing cauldron exercises. So they envelop, they surround, and then you bring in artillery and just bomb the shit out of it. I think a Russian major put it to me really well that, car parks can't fight back. If you flatten it, then that's what Russia tends to do, and it's what they did in Syria. It's what they do in a lot of these countries. So we are looking, rather than fighting, just pushing full on at Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, it's going to be a cauldron that kind of pincer in and then surround with artillery and just let her rip like Mariupol. And I find it really interesting that the first days of the war, the woman whose apartment block was hit was front page news even in Australia. It was, her photo was on the front page of the news, and that's, really common that, the casualties are being reported every single day. Whereas these days, most of the papers aren't recording as much as they used to, which is a bit sad. So I don't think if Russia thinks that the West is not paying attention, they will be much more comfortable using very heavy artillery doctrines, because they're going to have massive civilian casualties if they go down that road. Because I have one
question, just one question with regards to this, and then also I'll let other people go. My question is there anything that can tip the balance, I guess, a little bit more in Ukraine's favor in terms of equipment or technologies that are actually on the table that the United States or the rest of NATO can provide to Ukraine?
Yes, and it's happening now. Actually, the US is delivering the
long
what was
range.
It?
The long range MLRS. Yep.
MLRSs, yeah. Those things can do 40, 50 kilometers. That's awesome. I think that will be the big balance tipper. And actually, to play the armchair general a bit here, around Severodonetsk currently, the Russians concentrated around Popasna, like 10 battalion tactical groups or something. And with that, they could, through sweat and blood, they could eke out some progress. They're trying to cut off Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. The question is, though, if they can even pull that off. That's even that is an open question. I'm looking at live UA map currently, because if you close that cauldron, the Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, problem is behind you have Sloviansk and Kramatorsk with once again major Ukrainian troops. So if you want to cauldron them, the Ukrainian troops in Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, you would need a significant area behind. To cover to close them off. So you can just close it off by a 1 kilometer stripe, because then you get attacked in the back, and then the cauldron is immediately broken. Huge casualties. You have to pull back. So this looks intuitive and easy on the map, but this is really, really complicated from the Russian perspective. They might pull it off, but it will take weeks at this point to do anything meaningful here.
So we are seeing the Ukrainian forces. The Ukrainian forces are much better on the defensive than they are on the offensive, and we've seen that time and time again. There is these forces building up in Voronezh and Belgorod, who will likely be, as you pointed out, it's very difficult to sort of maintain that the back end. If they can take Siversk and effectively keep cutting off that cauldron, those are the forces that are sitting in Belgorod and Voronezh that will likely be rushed into that gap there. They'll become the new front line, and effectively the guys who are fighting around the Lysychansk area will likely just become it's an artillery force. It'll just keep bombarding that city until anything until it budges, until the city's just rubble. The long-term goal in this sort of Luhansk operation would be Kramatorsk. And again, the Kramatorsk is really well defended. One of my staff is there at the moment, but it is already starting to see the first sort of shells and getting ready, and everything's looking a bit scary in Kramatorsk. So I agree. It's not easy to sort of just cut the road, but at the moment, if they can cut the road and effectively build up around Siversk and take the sort of reserves they have sitting over the border in Russia at the moment, they may be able to put that cauldron off, which again, that's I think armchair general. They're trying to that would be the aim. Whether they can pull it off is, as we've seen in this entire war, up for questions.
Problem is though, like this is the tragedy to some extent. Oh, just real quick that the first question is like, how effective will those reserves be? Because the best equipment is already in Ukraine, right? So we currently see Russians ferrying in T-62 tanks to Ukraine, which will, to be fair, will most likely be used as like static firing positions in the south. But still, I mean, that's not a good sign when those get brought out. So equipment and also motivation it's questionable with those reserves. But even if you assume that they'll be fine, right? Here's the tragedy of the whole situation. Like if we zoom out on the map, if we step back a bit, Donetsk and Luhansk are not really the primary objectives of the Ukrainian army, right? Like at this point, they are secondary or tertiary. Like the main objective is what? Kharkiv, or like it's all the major cities, like the Kharkiv, Odessa, Dnipro, Kiev, obviously, and those are just not happening. So at the end of the day, this is what we always have to keep in mind.
Then they are. Oh, sorry, I was just going to quickly put out. Yeah, and they are getting Kharkiv back. We are seeing very little troops left in the sort of that northern block there. A lot of those troops that have been fighting in Kharkiv, that are battle hardened, that have done stuff, are being moved down to that southern block. So yeah, I think Kharkiv is the main one for Ukraine at the moment. Get that resecured because it is the second biggest city inside Ukraine, and that's fantastic. They are doing that, but at the moment the Russians are pushed over the border back into sort of over from Kharkiv. Those guys will likely move to the south to fight.
I do want to bring up the fact that also we're seeing Ukraine right now with about 700,000 troops mobilized. And that number is only going to continue to grow the more time between now and the future. We're going to see 800,000, 900,000. It won't be that long until we see over 1 million Ukrainians mobilized. And a lot of the aid that has been approved, some of it has arrived, a decent portion of it, not all of it has arrived. I primarily think when it comes to this war and how successful Ukraine will be and how much leverage it'll have in the negotiating table and what will decide whether Russia gets to start carving up that country is not really, I even think, Ukraine's willpower. I think Ukraine's willpower, from everybody I've talked to at the moment at least, is extremely strong. I cannot meet a single Ukrainian that I've interviewed, and I've interviewed refugees in Poland, people who have just lost their homes and completely. They lost their homes, lost their family. Not a single one of them said there should be any compromise with the government. So I think a lot of this is outside the reach of the government in Kiev to even make these decisions, because, it is not unlike the Ukrainians if the government makes a decision they don't like and they see as bad for Ukraine, for them to get a little rowdy, so to speak. So I think when it comes to this war, that it's about the willpower of the West, ultimately. And I do agree with, I think nobody here really disagrees with me on this, I would assume. It is the willpower of the West and to continue supporting them through economic troubles that could come, through political troubles that could come, through elections where people could start being worried about how the war is affecting their electoral prospects. The stronger the alliances, stronger NATO is, and the more united it is, will probably determine how much leverage Ukraine has and whether Ukraine is going to have to start signing agreements which gives away its sovereignty.
Yeah, I think Russia still has a pool. They haven't mobilized yet. They still have the ability to roll out large mobilization. We are seeing, particularly in the areas that are full of Central Asian workers, particularly, they're going to they have recruiters at train stations. In Moscow, it's quite, normal now to see recruiters saying, hey, are you a Tajik who sweeps streets? Well, just sign up here. We'll give you a Russian passport and we'll give you $7,000. And, all you'll have to do is drive tanks, drive trucks and make food. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. So there is a lot of, particularly those poorer sort of Russia-aligned states, where there is a large, younger male population who, is pretty destitute. I mean, most workers in, Kyrgyzstan are on sort of $300 USD a month. Those guys being offered $7,000 to come and fight in Ukraine is, a fairly big sum of money. Kyrgyzstan particularly will be a good recruiting pole. We are starting to see Japarov even, opening up to the idea of Russian recruiters being inside Bishkek and offering this as a option to Kyrgyz people. So there is still a fairly large pool for Russia to pull from, even if they aren't ethnic Russians. And the Russians will fight to the last Kyrgyz, which sounds awful.
I mean, it's an interesting strategy if you think about it, like solving Russian poverty. Like, if you send all the poor people to die, then that's what I call praxis.
There's a lot of poor people.
There is a decent amount of them. I've met a lot of them myself. But I want to go on to the last topic of the night. And it's about the real issue, okay? Us dirty...
Before you go on, I just wanted to send this one. I'm not going to play armchair general or make any predictions because I believe the situation is so fluid that it is very difficult to predict anything. Anything could go wrong at any given moment.
But it's fun to make informed guesses.
I know. As for Adam, what he set out is like his ideal goal. I think one of my main ideal goals in this war, what I would really like to happen would be the sinking of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. Because that is the entire reason they're there in
progress.
If that entire damn thing just goes to the bottom of the sea and the Black Sea just turns into a Turkish-Romanian lake, that would be the ideal outcome for me.
It's already a Ukrainian national landmark, isn't it?
The Moskva, the shipwreck.
It has been declared a Ukrainian national landmark. I also want to say that I don't want to make any predictions because it's kind of hard to figure out how much incompetence has the Russian army actually cut out of the military. If there is a short ceasefire here or there, how could that affect the conflict? How stable really is Putin's support at home, really? I mean, we can talk about polling, but everybody and their mother who knows anything about Russia knows that trusting the polling numbers is kind of difficult because who's doing the polling, who exactly is being polled, who, you get the idea. And so I don't really want to make any predictions, but what I will say is the Ukrainians will take Moscow by December. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next topic. And this is the real important topic that us dirty Westerners, we've been ignoring, okay? I've heard a lot of Russophobia in here today, and that's the real issue we need to address, is Russophobia, okay? So I'm going to read a statement from Sergei Lavrov. Moscow says, West has declared total war on Russia. Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, has accused Western countries of waging a total war on Russia and its people and culture. Western allies are canceling Russia and everything connected with it, including banning Russian writers, composers, and other cultural figures, he said at a ministry meeting. Here's his direct statement. The West has declared war on us, on the whole Russian world. The culture of canceling Russia and everything connected with our country is already reaching the point of absurdity. It was safe to say that the situation will be with us for a long time, he said. He said the U.S. and its satellites are doubling, tripling, and quadrupling their efforts to contain our country by using the widest range of tools, from unilateral economic sanctions to thoroughly false propaganda in the global media space. He goes on and on and on, but basically, the premise is Russophobia, canceling Russia. What do you guys think about this? This isn't the first time we've heard Russian politicians bring up the idea that Russia's getting #canceled.
This is like fascism 101, play the victim, or Russia will claim that you are victimizing them as they are gutting your bullet-ridden corpse in the forest with a Bowie knife, right? Because at that point the accusation will be that you're unlawfully dulling their knife with your bones. Anyway, the victim complex will go on until till eternity. I think it should be ignored. Hitler did the same thing when he invaded Poland. He was like, the West is about to encircle Germany and try to strangle us, and Poland is a security threat to Germany, etc. It's fascism 101, and also accuse your opponent the exact same thing that you're doing.
This is just propaganda gibberish. It's really not even worth listening to.
I mean, they've been saying the same thing since ever, so nothing new here.
I agree, it's complete propaganda. This is fascism 101. The only thing I would suggest is yelling at a Russian woman who runs a bakery in Boston, she's not in charge of this war, and that we have seen a bit of that where they are sort of yelling at Russian citizens who are outside, and it sucks because there are a lot of Russians who do not want this war.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
it's a huge chunk.
That's bad, but that's not also unexpected. Every time there's a war, this happens. Remember Freedom Fries? Or any time when America invaded Iraq, there was a lot of countries that people did things similar to that. That just happens. And it's bad, but it's also, I feel like a lot of people feel hopeless in these situations where they see the war, they see the carnage, they see the destruction on TV, and quite frankly, the average person can't do much. They're not military training, they don't have military training, they can't go over there and fight, they don't have billions of dollars of aid. I mean, they can vote in a certain way, they might be able to donate a few bucks, but that doesn't feel as fulfilling as being like, I have announced that at my store we'll no longer serve vodka because, we stand with Ukraine, or we're going to name it Ukrainka or whatever. It makes them feel like they're doing something. That's what I think it is. It makes people feel power.
For me, there's this detachment from reality that is so glaring there, which is this weird culture, American cultural rhetoric. It's like, oh, I'm being cancelled. You invaded a country.
No, it didn't. It's the West's fault.
It's a special military operation.
That's right. Yeah.
What? You didn't make a stupid tweet. You didn't. You invaded a country. This isn't Fox News.
It's a special canceling operation.
Speaking of parallel reality and propaganda, Dylan, are you aware that we've been challenged to a debate recently?
Oh yes, with Infrared and Jackson Hinkle. Yes.
Oh, those two betas! Oh my god! At first, I was supposed to debate them with Destiny in a 2v2, but they bitched out in the last moment. And I actually published the email because those, I think, like, people started sending me like screens of like, hey, look, they're claiming that you bitched out. I was like, no, I didn't. Like, and actually, like, James told me that, like, despite his best efforts to convince them, they backed out because they didn't dare to debate us. So hey, if you're listening, you two champions, I'm glad you finally could stop being betas. I hope you will not bitch out again. I'm open to it, and I'm looking forward to engaging with your smooth brain ADIQ arguments.
I'm trying to see if I can get Patrick Hillsman to actually do it in place of me, because I have my hands full with this documentary. I want to see if Patrick Hillsman will do it. I'm trying to convince him. But I want to talk about this for a second, because Kraut actually brought something up that I think is actually a good point. And this is the main thing I wanted to hit on. Why is it that canceling has become such a big thing in Russian war rhetoric, unironically? I mean, Putin, in his speech trying to justify his invasion of a country that would lead to the deaths of tens of thousands of people. Possibly we'll already see over 100,000 dead if we're talking about all dead in the conflict. I mean, he brought up canceling and J.K. Rowling.
Because Russia is a dumpster. It's a shithole. It's an impoverished dump.
Yeah, I mean,
okay, Russia's a beautiful country. Russia's a beautiful country.
Okay.
Here comes out the Russophobia.
It's an impoverished dump, if you think about it that way. You need to distract people from the fact that they live in a dump. And the Russian state, like, keep in mind, one of the first things that Putin did when he became president, I think within 2 years of becoming president, he shut down and took control over the most important media companies in Russia. They invested millions into this enormous propaganda machine. Like, the Russian propaganda machine is substantial. It's big. And they, as part of that, they invested also a lot themselves through RT and the various news networks they set up and the various weird vatniks that you find on Twitter. They invested themselves heavily into the American culture war, in the political entertainment industry over there. Like, they invested themselves a lot in it. It's part and parcel of what they do right now. So it's one of the few assets they have in this, actually.
First, I just want to say Russia's a beautiful country, okay? I'm not Russophobic like my friend, okay?
It is a beautiful country. I'm not denying that it is a wealth and culture, but a majority of the country lives in poverty. It's run by thieves and crooks. It's a mafia state. It's,
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. So the more polite way of saying it is, this is something that's being used by the Russians to distract the population from the fact that they're a bunch of corrupt bastards who won't fix the country's problems, infrastructural, economic, societal, etc., right? Based Russia coming to liberate Europe has one of the worst drug policies in the world and has a very, very high percentage of drug users. Not to mention like the problem with, domestic violence and the problem with
Part of it is also just
violence.
pathetic. Part of it is also just pathetic. It's like whingy, whiny. Yeah, it's just what.
I think
I
you're
fully
right
agree.
though
I
that
think
I think they invested in the American culture war through RT, through the Internet Research Agency, through all these things. They invested in the American culture war specifically under the guise of trying to use the American population, public opinion against
Soviet propaganda.
Yeah.
Soviet propaganda was so much better. It's just, we're carrying the global revolution in the name of the proletariat, blah, blah, blah. This is just, I'm getting cancelled. It's
a less energetic somehow.
There are there's a lot of talking points that start on RT that end up on Fox News and Newsmax and OAN, a couple of days later.
I mean, both far-right news organizations, yes.
So I think the interesting canceling, when the word canceling is a very Americanized word. So there is a lot of talk in sort of different disinformation circles that the Russians are going to hope to push this as a midterm issue. That if we can make it seem to get the Republicans behind us, that if the Republicans take the House, they can run it and pull out and say we're isolationist. Again, that's a very long shot. But I think the Internet Research Agency is looking for work to do, and they're kind of thinking, well, if we can get the Americans, the Republicans take the House and the Senate, they may, cut off funding to Ukraine because they'll care about the debt again. And that's where we'll go. But yeah,
it's a note on that.
It's propaganda 101.
A note on that thing, a bit unrelated to the United States. There's rumors, at least the Ukrainian intelligence service claimed that the Hungarian government, Viktor Orban, knew the invasion was going to happen weeks before, and that he was made an offer by the Russian government to receive a chunk of land. Or something.
I would say that I don't know if that happened, but if it happened, that would track, obviously.
That is, by the way, I looked that up. That would be qualified as a cause to kick Hungary out of the European Union.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
and not only the European Union, I would say NATO as well, in my opinion. But
but before, let me get my other EU country citizenship, please.
But
I just want to quickly add before you go, Dan. It's just a very short point. At the end of the day, it should just be. I just got to emphasize it. I know everyone will agree with this point. That at the end of the day, all of us are not saying that normal Russian folk should be the targets of prejudice or bigotry, but it has to go with Kraut's point, to Adam's point, Mark's point. At the end of the day, the Russian government did invade a sovereign country and is doing imperial aggression against it, and that is the main, at this point in time, target. So we have to cancel it. It's a good thing that we try to cancel Russia from annexing territory of a sovereign country.
It's the least thing you could do. This is the absurd thing about them complaining about cancelling. Your boys are getting fried alive in the steel coffins that you're sending over there. You're worried what people think about you on the internet. What the fuck is wrong with you? It's just, it's so absurd. It's so absurd. They lost.
At least they didn't get cancelled. They just got burned alive inside a BTR.
Yeah, it's what a weird world.
The thing is, for me, right? I think the canceling part, that wasn't directed at a Russian audience. And no one in Russia knows anything about J.K. Rowling or anything else. This was directed under the guise that this will be translated, this will be heard in the West, and then Republicans will be like, yeah, I know canceling's bad. I love Dave Chappelle. I love my Joe Rogan, man. DMT, man, DMT. And then boom, they're flying a Russian flag in the street, or they're saying no war, not our business, right? The problem is this has hooked a few people. One was Madison Cawthorn, who after many homoerotic scandals is leaving office. He's not getting reelected. Then you got your Marjorie Taylor Greene. You got like 5 or 6 people, right? Who must go? Madison or Zelensky? It was Madison first. But when you come to Lindsey Graham, when you come to Mitch McConnell, when you come to these Kevin McCarthy, these long-standing Republican leaders who are most likely still going to be at the helm, right? They're the ones who are elected. They're the ones with the influence. They're the ones with the power. And they are some of the people with some of the most hawkish records in American foreign policy, right? I find it very hard to believe that they would not be signing off on any aid to Ukraine or any aid package because Putin, they're afraid they might get associated with canceling, right? No, these people have been working 30, 40 years in their lifetime funding weapons development program with the wet dream that one day they'd get to be able to be used against Ruskies. That was their wet dream. Some of them were ruling through the Soviet era. And where they were passing these policies, and those are the people who are going to be like, well, I don't want to look like a Twitter leftist, so I'm not going to, I'm sorry. That's not going to happen. Mitch McConnell doesn't read Twitter. He probably didn't even listen to Putin's speech. He was just probably salivating at the idea of these weapons deals that could be made, the Land-Lease program. Immediately, anytime Biden goes a little bit further on Ukraine, it is Lindsey Graham, Mitch McConnell, Kevin McCarthy that are first to give him a round of applause. If anything, I would say if the Republicans were in charge, they might even go further than the Democrats. It is a thing that is popular amongst the Trump wing of the party, but when it comes to the people who have the committee positions that have to do with foreign policy, absolutely, no, there's just no way. I don't believe it. Not to mention, then you have the Democrat coalition, you have the Democrats generally as well. So even if there was even let's say 10 to 20 to 30% of Congress was anti-war and it was the Republican side, the Democrats and the anti-supporting Ukraine, I shouldn't even say pro-war, anti-supporting Ukraine, it's not politically feasible. It doesn't make any sense to me, at least not in this current political climate.
I just wanted to add to that. This is something that I've seen so many times, especially of the type of leftist who used to be like, this is the US bullying, the Ukraine is full of Nazis, etc., and suddenly went silent when the war actually broke out. Yeah, and then this the main talking point they pointed out was complaining about the US arms industry, just going Russian is going to make so much money. The biggest winner of this war in terms of arms manufacturers are going to be the Turks and the Ukrainians. Yeah. Everyone is going to line up to buy Bayraktars, and everyone is going to line up to buy the Stugna P, which has proven to be a massively effective anti-tank weapon as just a fraction of the cost of a Javelin. Yeah. So, the Ukrainian and the Turkish arms industry are the big winners, not the American arms industry.
You've got the public singing a song about your modern air, about a drone, right? And it was it's a popular song that I walk through the street and I'll hear people singing Bayraktar in the streets of Lviv. Yeah, no, it's free. No, the Turkish arms industry is dancing a jig. You could not imagine this amount of good press for their weapons. This just, unbelievable.
Yeah. It's why Kazakhstan is cancelling their Chinese and Russian drone orders and ordering Bayraktars. It's why Kyrgyzstan is also ordering lots of Bayraktars, and it's why I sing that song as well. It's damn catchy.
I gotta say, I'm actually more angry about the Turkish arm industry getting a W, because if there's any country that I have more reserved anger towards, it is Turkey and Erdogan. Oh my goodness.
There's this interesting thing that happened during the Trump administration. This is now years back, but Trump, he tried to bully Europe into spending more on defense. And then Europe signed this agreement saying, okay, we'll spend more on defense. And then Trump interrupted that process saying, no, but you have to buy American weapons. And Europe didn't want to do that. There is a process here where it's and we're seeing this, reiterated here. If you make yourself dependent on arms imports, it's a dangerous game that you're playing. And even though we're proceeding in that NATO integration, I think it's far more likely that a lot of European countries, instead of the F-35 program, are going to buy Swedish Gripens. We have a domestic arms industries in Europe. And the move globally, I think, from here on is not going to be buy American weapons, is diversify your arms portfolio and produce as much as you can yourself.
Could be. Well, but Ukraine isn't going to get anything from Germany, though. That we know for sure.
Well, we did an episode recently on the show talking about the sort of EU army and the sort of how the difficulties around it. We got the head of NATO on.
That's the most annoying lie there is.
Yeah.
That's one of the most
just pointing out. It's not going to happen. But the arms industry in Europe is something that people can focus on. And when we had the head of NATO, that was his first. The arms industry needs to be, because right now NATO, Bulgaria still uses lots of Russian weapons. And that's something that NATO should be. The very first thing to look at is giving, a nation like Bulgaria can't afford to go get American weapons, but they can sure as shit afford Romanian and Italian and lots of domestically made European weapons. And I think the European arms industry is looking at this and, let's push for effectively unified arms manufacturing in Europe that they can supply all their troops quite well.
Can I just add that I understand that at the end of the day, the Bayraktars are being used against, of course, Russians and in this war, and that's, I guess, you could say, is a good thing. But at the end of the day, at least from my perspective, I have to inject this just as as a thing. But we also have to remember that the Bayraktars had their, you could say, training, you could say, the target practice on Kurds in northern Syria and in southern Kurdistan or northern Iraq. So that just has to be mentioned, so we don't idealize this.
There's considerably less ethics in the European arms industry compared to the US. Italian targeting systems were used to gas civilians in Aleppo. It's the Germans built a specific tank for the Saudis that was designed for crowd control. A tank built for crowd control. That's we have considerably, we're less scrupulous in who we sell weapons to here.
First, I heard Kraut control. I was like, "Whoa, are you that big there?"
No, crowd control.
Huge threat to the Saudis.
Tank.
Very big threat. You're gonna bring liberalism to Saudi Arabia. It's gonna be Kraut. But
Oh no.
I kind of want to ask one last question. So, when it comes to this idea of Russian propaganda in the West, which is, I think, what this really is tied to, this canceling thing. We've seen RT take massive blows internationally. We're seeing countries like Estonia, which have significant Russian-speaking populations, ban state media. We're seeing other countries move to do the same thing. We're seeing a lot of these shills who worked for the Russian state TV internationally, peddling these talking points, getting fired, getting laid off because they don't got the budget and they don't have the broadcasting rights anymore. What do you think do you think the Russians are going to start to abandon this tactic, or do you think they're going to double down, reorganize, and they're going to continue to try to target international domestic audience? Because it feels like they've kind of lost the PR game to epic proportions.
Well,
They might start doubling down.
There are people who are always going to worship the decaying corpse of the Soviet Union just because they, ideologically feel aligned with it.
Oh, sure, but I mean, I think this is going to be the same thing as if you ban a bunch of neo-Nazis off of YouTube, right? So of course they'll try to come back somehow, still preach to the masses, but it's going to be far less effective because deplatforming works, and especially if it's done on this scale, as it was done by RT or with RT. Then holy shit, it does work. Russians might try to come back to claw some of it back. They might. It's possible, obviously, but it's going to be much less effective because the main channels are closed, and those are the main channels. Right? There's not much else you can do. At least short or mid term, maybe long term they'll figure something out. But then we can just ban those attempts as well.
So it's when this war broke out, one of the interesting things that particularly Rand's doing a lot of work on, and I talking with the Cambridge Analytica guys as well. Russia has always had this kind of overt, RT, really, really loud megaphones, but they've also been really good at micro-targeting. And it's a lot of, with Facebook, effectively, if they have about 100 likes on your Facebook, they know you better than your partner does. And that comes straight from Cambridge Analytica's president. Effectively, the Russians are now doing a lot of micro-targeting, and there's a lot of stuff that I don't think anyone in this panel is going to see in their Facebook feeds, but a lot of the people who are maybe more susceptible will. Like that photo that went around of the American tank with the trans flag and the Russian tank all looking nice, and it's stuff like that none of us will probably ever see in our feeds because we're reasonable people. Whereas I think if you are susceptible to that, and the Russians can identify that you're susceptible to that, you will start to see a lot more micro-targeted propaganda moves, and they've been pretty good with their micro-targeting on social media, but. It's the Twitter bots are also out in force, and it's always fun to watch the analytics go up the moment that St. Petersburg office hours start.
I gotta say, somebody said this, and I guess we can close on this. Somebody said something about the corpse of the Soviet Union. I think it was you, Kraut, right? I've been here in Ukraine, and there are these people on the street who just sell stuff and see whatever. I see that in DC all the time too. But there's a lot of old Ukrainian men selling pins, And not like the modern. I see like a lot of people selling modern pins now to like America, but I'm talking like old Soviet pins from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And I've bought so many of these pins. So many. A lot of them are just straight up medals. And I'm looking at these medals, and I feel like there should be like a legal process for me to like buy what is essentially like war medals or medals of like glory or whatever, but it's like I can buy like almost like a bucket full for that's $20.
That's in the entire Eastern Europe. When I was in St. Petersburg a few years ago, I bought watches, Navy watches. From
how much do they cost? Because they're so unbelievably cheap. I'm getting like these amazing
€10
like,
a piece.
Yeah, for me it's like 20 cents for some of these. It's insane. 20 cents American. And I remember turning
you have to keep in mind that the Soviet Union was a place where where medals were awarded for machines if they managed to run for 2 years without breaking down.
Yeah, I awarded myself the like it was like the Radioman's badge actually, because I think I earned it as a Twitch streamer. So I've been awarded post Soviet humorously, like post the Soviet Union. I've awarded myself this badge. I think I earned it. But I remember turning to Patrick Hillsman, who I'm out here with, who's a wonderful guy. You should check him out. And he actually was in Aleppo. And I said to him, I feel so weird right now because these people are so happy to have me buy these things and have me buy them at such large amounts. And I'm like, but I feel like I'm looting off of a corpse. I remember telling him, I feel like I'm looting off of the corpse of a dead empire. Like I feel like I'm like some like old Egyptian explorer just taking like the nose off the pharaoh and running away. I don't know.
There's nothing wrong with that.
These medals are not so valuable. Don't worry about it. Like my grandpa used to be like a sort of mid-range officer in the Hungarian People's Army back in the day. He was mostly a bureaucrat, like never really saw actions, did some exercises, etc. But he has this huge bag just fucking full of medals, right? So they really just like gave out medals like candy back in the day. So what you have in front of you looks very nice, and it's neat that you have it, but they're usually like not worth much more than the metal it was made from.
Yeah, it's mostly Westerners that would take an interest to it and maybe pay a little bit more. I assume that's the main people who buy them from them. I assume not a lot of like Russians are that interested in buying a bunch of old Soviet pins on the side of the street.
They're just tourists usually, yes.
It's
very interesting.
I got tourists.
My dad lived in the Soviet Union in the 70s and the 80s, and he worked as a journalist. And he smuggled out of the Soviet Union and back to Europe icons, gold-plated icons from Russian churches, which were basically left to rot and decay during the Soviet Union. And that is one of the things where you might get in trouble if you take with you something like that. He has never declared them officially, so nobody knows he has them. But yeah. What you have is just a piece of metal that was awarded to something. Have you ever looked at Shoigu's medals?
I have not. What is that?
Shoigu, the Minister of Defense of Russia.
Oh, you're talking about how they have like a million medals.
Yeah. And if you look at his medals, you will see that they are a medal for being in the armed forces during the 600th University of the founding of St. Petersburg, a medal for participating in dishonor guard session, whatever. They're all participatory medals. They don't have any meaning. They're not for any sort of valorous action.
Oh my God, that is so many.
Shoigu has never been a soldier, like in the traditional sense, right? Like he has never seen action. He's just a bureaucrat, basically, or like a politician.
Yeah,
they're left in their bloody participation trophies. I told you.
That's literally what it is. It's participation trophies.
I guess for me it was the first time I ever realized how much it's the Soviet Union is a dead empire, and you can see these old decaying sides of it just everywhere. I guess I've never seen that before.
Welcome to Europe, Dylan.
Yeah.
True. Thank you all for coming on the first episode of the Ukraine Report podcast with me and my co-host AdamSomething. I appreciate you all coming on. I had a blast talking about this with people who are actually interested in it. I had a great time. I hope everybody else did, and if you didn't, keep your mouth shut. But we're going to outros, so everybody shout out their stuff where they can find you. I'm going to start with Michael.
So you can check me out on the Redline podcast. We'll be interviewing experts from around the globe on one big geopolitical issue each fortnight, as well as doing analysis and live panels ranging from everything from Chinese influence in South America to who Putin's most likely successor will be. And you can check that out on most major platforms, or you can follow me on Twitter at Mike Hilliard Oz. Oz is in Australia. Otherwise, you can also check out I also run a Central Asia-based show called Spotlight on Central Asia, going through the fortnightly news stories coming out of the Central Asian region.
One day I'm going to bully my way onto his show. I'm going to throw it over to Stoic.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Dylan. My name's Anthony Avice to Buisson. That's the name I write under, but you can find me on Twitter at Stoic Viper. I occasionally stream, but I'm not a streamer at the end of the day, so just keep that in mind. Yes, I've got an article on EU refugee policy that's going to be published at the end of May for Johns Hopkins University. I'll be sharing that on my Twitter, so you can find me at Stoic Viper. Thank you for having me, Dylan.
He's also done some great work for the Jerusalem Post. We're now going to throw it over to Kraut.
I make YouTube videos. I'm currently not making anything on Russia because my patrons vote on what I make my videos on. And yeah, whatever. That's it.
Can you reveal what they voted for?
The next videos are going to be on oligarchic structures and how to develop in economies and in political structures. And then we're going to make a video about why Saudi Arabia is doomed.
Wow, it's really sexy. We're going to now throw it over to my co-host, AdamSomething.
Yes, thank you. It's been fun, and I hope everyone recovered from the trauma of seeing me without glasses. Also, next time I'm going to be coming in from my usual setup. I'm currently camping out in the deep Czech countryside, so
he is deep behind enemy lines. He's in occupied Luhansk. He's assassinating 20 Russians a day.
Shh.
Oh, sorry.
Anyway, yeah. So I'll be seeing every one of you, the viewers, next time from my regular setup. And thank you for everyone for being here. It's been fun.
Fantastic. So for everybody watching at home who's like, wow, this is a great podcast. So me and Adam have agreed to try to make this more like, we're going to try to roll it out, like try to do weekly. That might not always be the case because, of course, I'm in Ukraine moving around recording a documentary. But next time, there's a good chance it won't be live streamed. It'll just be uploaded to YouTube. I just wanted the first one to be live streamed so we can get more attention on it. Thank you all for coming on. You all have a blessed weekend. And thank you. I appreciate you coming on for the first edition. Awesome.
Thanks so much. It was a pleasure being here.
Be well.